my name is Ava McKenzie. I'm debating for Lindblom Math and Science Academy. I've been debating for 1 year so far, and I will be defending in person learning.
And hello, my name is Amati Washington. I debate for Kenwood Academy High School. I've been debating for 2 years and I will be defending virtual learning.
In person learning should be preferred over virtual learning. The positive impacts of in person learning include two major issues: social and emotional health and accessibility. First, school is one of the primary places where students learn social and emotional skills. According to Roger Weisberg, professor of psychology and education at the University of Illinois in Chicago, experts agree that greater social and emotional competence can increase the likelihood of high school graduation, readiness for post secondary education, career success, positive family and work relationships, better mental health, reduce criminal behavior, and engage citizenship. If students don't have access to these interactions, they can be at a great disadvantage in the development of their personal and professional lives. Next, the CDC published a health study in March that found that virtual learning may result in more risk to wellness and mental health in both students and parents. The study reports that almost 25% of worsened or mental or emotional health in students received some sort of virtual learning. Next, students in poor communities are less likely to have access to the internet and computers. The transition to virtual learning will continue to deepen the disparities within the educational system faced by students of color and low income families. According to the NPR and First Get Chicago, about 20% of children in Chicago live in homes without the internet. With no access to the internet, students are not equipped to succeed in a technological learning environment. Low income students who are disproportionately from minority communities are negatively impacted by virtual learning. The education barrier furthers the entrenchment of the racial gap that exists in society today. Next, students that have learning disabilities are not receiving the assistance that they need and were receiving prior to wide scale virtual learning. CNN reports that there are roughly 7 million students with special needs in the United States who qualify for specifically tailored accommodations at school, known as the IEP. These students are finding the day to day education they are receiving falling short. In conclusion, you should vote for in person learning for two reasons. One, because our students' and social and emotional well being is greatly undervalued in society. And two, our education should be accessible to all. Thank you. I'm open for cross-ex.
All right. I'll be going with my first question. Why is it necessary to return to school in person right now instead of just waiting until COVID cases drop?
Students have been greatly affected by COVID, yes, but also they have been greatly affected by the lack of studying and the lack of schooling. So students right now, their main focus should be to get back to school and to learn as much as possible.
Okay, thank you. On to my next question. CPS has drastically increased internet availability access in just 1 year, and still most kids have internet access. So why should we put internet access over potential lives?
Okay. Well, as I said right now, and as I said in my constructive, about 20% of children in Chicago live in homes without the internet. So most is not all. So right now, we should be focusing on these students to be able to pick up on their learning. And this is really important because learning is a stepping stone for everything in their future.
All right. And finally, minority schools tend to be overcrowded and close proximity leads to far more COVID cases. Why would you risk infecting more of these minorities in these neighborhoods?
Well, I don't believe that we might be infecting more students, but right now, as I've been saying before, the most important fact that we should be keeping in mind is that these students who are in these low income areas and stuff, they need this schooling more than the people who aren't actually in it because they've been disproportionately affected by it
Okay.
before.
Thank you.
You're
Um,
welcome.
I'll be beginning my speech now. Virtual learning is preferable to in-person learning in Chicago right now. Safety should be our number one priority when it comes to school. When students are sick, they are unable to effectively learn or socialize. And that leads me to my first contention, which is safety. Subpoint A is COVID. COVID cases are skyrocketing in Chicago right now due to the highly contagious Delta variant. Because the vaccine isn't approved for kids under 12, no elementary school and no middle school students are vaccinated. And according to US News, only 25% of eligible kids are vaccinated. As has been widely reported, kids, especially younger ones, often take off their masks throughout the day or wear them incorrectly. But even if a student perfectly follows protocol, they can still easily catch the airborne Delta variant at lunch and pass it along to high-risk family members. Subpoint B is teachers. Some teachers will also catch COVID, and they teach many different classes of students. Teachers are often older and at much higher risk of hospitalization and death. Many will quit rather than risk their health. The Chicago Teacher Union president agreed on August 30th and said CPS is a mess and the city's reopening plan is not ready. That leaves schools understaffed, and it means students don't receive the attention and feedback they need to learn and grow. And that leads me to my next contention, which is distance. Many students have long commutes to get to and from school. On average, in Chicago, students spend 3 hours of time just in transit. This is physically draining and stressful for students, as they may not get home until 8 p.m. at night. That leaves students with little to no time to do homework, eat dinner, spend time with family, and unwind and relax. This is especially true because, according to ABC News on August 30th, a recent mass resignation of school bus drivers has led to the cancellation of many bus routes, leaving students with no transportation at all to school. In conclusion, if you care about the safety of children, you must vote for virtual learning. As a society, we must prioritize the health of students and teachers above all else. Thank you.
Are you open for cross-ex?
Yes.
Okay, great. First question, is there any way to guarantee that students wouldn't go online just to search for answers?
Well, there's no way to guarantee that students won't go online just for answers, but schools should be teaching kids the process to find the answers and not just to find the solutions. And in certain classes, like writing or reading classes, you can't get the answer just by looking up things online. And also, it's far less important than the lives of these students.
Okay. And how does your constructive solve for children with learning disabilities who need to be in classrooms?
Well, I would say that virtual learning doesn't completely help or solve for these issues. It does mean that they aren't exposed to COVID, and not rushing kids into school right now makes the quarantine period shorter. So that would lead to actually less time for these kids to be stuck at home and not be able to get the proper learning they need.
Okay, and how does your constructive solve for the difference in the spread of resources, like in the Black and Brown communities, compared to those in white ones?
Well, just in the last year, we've seen a massive increase in ramping up of technology to these lower income communities. And it's better that they would end up with less learning than they would end up catching COVID and not being able to do the things they love, like sports, talking with friends, being around friends. And the last thing of COVID is far longer. Also, the quarantine period would be longer if we rush kids back into school.
Okay, thank you. I want to start my rebuttal. Students aren't learning at home in the same way as how they used to learn at school. During the pandemic, many houses' incomes disappeared and many families could not afford to obtain computers for their children or to learn at home. My opponent addresses none of this. Students are genuinely affected by the lack of schooling, and as I said earlier, it will greatly impact Black and Brown communities and widen the gap. About 20% of children in Chicago live in homes without the internet, and about 40% of students in North Lawndale neighborhood are connected. Only 40%. That's a small amount. My opponent also said that it's harder to get into school and it stresses out students, but for most children, it's still the same as it was as from 1 year ago. Nothing has changed, and my impact, is still greater. He also says something about increasing socialization. This isn't about increasing socialization. That's only a small part. We're trying to get students to get back into the classrooms to be able to learn more and to be able to learn for their futures. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech. I'll be finishing up the debate with my rebuttal. At the end of the debate, ask yourself if increasing socialization for kids is worth people dying, because that's what it will cost. Sick students can't learn, sick teachers can't teach, and scared teachers quit. Rushing kids into school makes quarantine longer, which would make the mental health and education impacts worse. And the longer a virus is a threat, the more it evolves and the more lives it takes. A mother of a student wrote, I would prefer you go back to classes by Zoom. And she also wrote, I prefer you lose a little knowledge which you can recover and not lose a child or a family member. Cross-applying for my first speech, not a single elementary school student under 12 is vaccinated. Do you want to risk their lives for this? Not to mention minority deaths is far more prevalent if they are in overpopulated schools. And once again, only 25% of kids have been vaccinated. Jesse Sharkey wrote, CPS is a mess and the city reopening plan is not ready for prime time, but it's a familiar position because educators are called upon to turn water into wine. Just in the last year, we have seen a vast expansion of tech access and still less a lessening of the racial gap. Regardless, especially if people are packed together with COVID. Would you rather children with disabilities not be able to go to school for a year or not be able to go to school for far longer because of the lengthened quarantine period? Also, cross-applying from my distance argument in my first speech, every second a child is in transit, they can catch or spread COVID to others. In conclusion, don't risk lives for something we will all get over sooner. The more we stay at home, the quicker this will all be over. Thank you.